Off the top this morning, I want to discuss Melbourne. Then I want to discuss who's in for Carlton this weekend. I've got some selection mail there. I'll give you the latest on Gil McLachlan. He's made a trip to Tasmania today. I'll try to explain what's going on there. And I want to answer some questions today, including has the market at the moment for Alistair Clarkson cooled? I'll give you the insight what's happening in North Melbourne at the moment and a big boost for the Bulldogs yesterday. Lockie Hunter back. I'll explain that and more. But off the top, I've been covering the Melbourne story all week. I'll try and give you some insight on how this has sort of developed behind the scenes. I'm sure most of our listeners have read all the articles or certainly familiar with the guts and the crux of what's happened. In terms of what led to the fight, well, it now appears there was banter amongst up to 6 drunken players. Players there included Michael Hibberd and Luke Dunstan. It was a group of 6. I'm not apportioning any blame on anyone. I'm just explaining who was there. There was obviously a lot of ego, a lot of banter. Some of the banter included some inappropriate comments, in particular, though, from May. Those comments directed at his teammates. Melksham took umbrage or issue with that, stepped in to protect his teammates, and that's where the fight has started. In terms of where the fight was, one eyewitness I spoke to at the restaurant who worked at the restaurant told me earlier in the week, when this wasn't much of a story by then, so there was no, bias or anything like that in terms of their information. It was just raw information that it was a big fight that started outside and spilt outside. Another well-placed source has told me that, in fact, it went across the road and onto the grass area there in Greville Street, in that little park opposite Entrecôte, for our listeners familiar with Greville Street. And then it was a fight and a brawl, and there's no other way to describe it. Mark Robinson mentioned that last night. We mentioned it on the news. It was a fight. It wasn't a scuffle or a little altercation or whatever you want to call it. It wasn't banter. There were obviously some sharp insults and words, and there was a fight in the street on Greville Street in that park opposite. In terms of, they're the circumstances as I know it. Melbourne, I was at Max Gawn's conference yesterday refuting that suggestion that May had told Melksham that if he'd been in the grand final team, Melksham, they would have lost. It seems like in particular, the sharp words were directed at another teammate. In terms of the sanction, we know the evidence suggests now that Melksham has given one to May in the chops, in the mouth, which is quite a serious issue, like a punch into the head and into the mouth. It begs the question whether the sanction was sufficient. I asked Max Gawn about that yesterday, and the Melbourne's view is that community service is enough for Melksham. This happened in the community, and don't underestimate the significance of doing community service, and they think it's appropriate that he gives back to the community. Obviously, May is an interesting one. He's copped a week because he was out drinking. It's interesting that his teammates didn't pull May back from drinking. He was on concussion protocols. But I'm told that May is hard to rein in at times. It's hard to tell him what to do, particularly, obviously, in this case, when he's been drinking. So the Melbourne Football Club certainly sticking by that sanction, which is community service for both players and a week for May. In terms of Melksham's latest, he had surgery yesterday at 12:30. I spoke to Dr. Peter Larkins. They call this fight bite. The crux of it is that when you punch someone in the mouth, and in particular the teeth are full of bacteria, and if that gets into a knuckle, for example, you need to get in there with saline under surgery and clean all that out, because it can get a septic reaction, and that can develop, I'm told, quite quickly. So the timeline of when Melbourne say that Melksham got this infection on Tuesday following Sunday night certainly marries up, according to Dr. Peter Larkins. It can actually happen, I'm told, the infection quite quickly. In terms of the AFL's position, I've checked with them multiple times this week. The Integrity Department was aware of Melbourne's response, didn't supervise it, but was happy with Melbourne's response, and at least officially, it is official, the AFL Integrity Department's not looking into this matter. Look, I find that slightly surprising. I know they don't have the power to compel the restaurant Entrecôte to hand over the CCTV or compel Stonington, that's the council, to hand over the CCTV. But you'd think it would be worth inquiring. You know, this was in a public place. It's a high-profile restaurant, high-profile players. There was a fight in and outside the restaurant where Melksham has suffered an injury, presumably as a result of a punch to a player's face. You know, what happens if May, for example, had fallen over and cracked his head or something worse? Like, it could have been a terrible situation. So I'm slightly surprised the AFL isn't investigating. But they're not. That's just the way it is. So it's settled in that instance at the moment. Melksham, I think, due out of hospital as soon as today. It's likely he would have stayed in overnight last night, and he'll take probably 1 or 2 weeks to recover from his hand infection. Melbourne insisting yesterday that there's no broken bones involved. Queen's Birthday's got some spice with Collingwood and Melbourne, of course, with Melbourne's big week. There's some boardroom, I would say controversy, but some interesting comments from the boardroom early this week. Now they've got this massive controversy involving May and Melksham, teammates boxing on at a restaurant. I'll tell you what's got some spice as well. Carlton and Essendon tomorrow night, Friday night, MCG. It's going to be absolutely massive, particularly in the context, obviously, of Carlton's form, but more particularly Essendon's 150th celebrations on Saturday night. Some selection mail from Carlton today. They've basically confirmed that Mackay will be back in the side, provided he gets through training today, but that applies to any player. They've got to get through training today. Mackay will be playing. I'm also told that Kennedy and Marchbank are back in for tomorrow night. Kennedy's a good one. Marchbank's massive. He hasn't played a senior game since 2019. A lot of recruiters and his management and people that rate him and know him reckon he's a jet player. So that'll be a massive boost for the Blues tomorrow night. I think Dow is obviously out. I think he'll be dropped, and Wiedering's out as well. So we knew that one. So that's going to be a massive game tomorrow night. Essendon, Darcy Parish yesterday said it's a line in the sand game for them. Look, good on them. It's their 150th, and he's got to say that. I'm not sure why the Bombers have to keep getting themselves up every week and say that just to get themselves up. They should have been more consistent this year. We know that for the Bombers, Jake Stringer will be back. It looks like Redmond and Guelphy will be back as well, according to the coach, the truck, Ben Rutten, this morning. They're not sure on McGrath, who suffered a groin setback or strain or scare or whatever you want to call it last Saturday at training. So they're not sure on McGrath's status, but it's going to be absolutely massive. The Essendon greats and legends celebrating on the ground beforehand. There'll be some celebrations as part of that. And, of course, the big one, 150th celebrations on Saturday night. It'll be as flat as a tack, that function, if they get done by the arch enemy, the Blues, big time tomorrow night. So let's hope the Bombers are competitive, and Essendon has every reason to celebrate the 150 years. Let's hope on Saturday night they can look beyond whatever the result is tomorrow night and have a great celebration on Saturday night. Tasmania has developed today. Gil McLachlan, the AFL CEO, has gone down to meet Premier Rockcliffe. That's the relatively new Premier after Premier Gutwin resigned in person. And I think it's the first time in person that Gil McLachlan and the new Premier Rockcliffe have met. Gil McLachlan landing this morning told reporters, as per our reports recently on this podcast and on 7 News, my reports on 7 News, that the stadium is required, a new one, to gain a 19th licence. That point shouldn't be glossed over. At the moment, there's no new stadium contained in the initial bid, the formal bid that Tasmania submitted to the AFL 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Working Party, or up to a month ago. And even the government down there this week has not rescinded, but gone back on this idea that they'll fully fund the stadiums. That's a big, big discussion point that will become a bigger one, I guess, in coming days. There's certainly a view from some club that this bid on the part of Tasmania has become a bit of a shambles and is a bit disjointed. There's a strong belief from some clubs that relocation or a partnership from an existing club, i.e. North Melbourne, remains the best option if the competition goes down this track of putting a team in Tasmania. And it's absolutely clear now from the AFL that it needs to include a stadium, and the bid doesn't include a stadium. The current guarantee from Tasmania, 10 years, is not long enough to placate at least a few clubs. The money, $10 million they're offering per year, I know they're offering to kick in 50 initially, is only about $2 million more than Tasmania currently give to Hawthorn and North Melbourne. So you could argue easily it's a bit of a piecemeal offer in that regard, and the government's a bit lukewarm compared to Premier Gutwin on all this. Gill could rescue this deal. I know that he probably wants to. I think the AFL is still supportive of a dedicated side, but some clubs now think this whole thing's a bit of a waste of time. Not the idea of a Tasmanian team, but just where this negotiation's at so close to August, which is when they're meant to be voting, I should say, 66% required, at least two-thirds majority on the creation of a 19th licence. Tasmania in particular are digging in their heels, saying we won't accept a relocated team or won't accept a joint venture with an existing team. They want a dedicated team. But that's not what the Carter report, which is the AFL's leading report, suggested. They came up with three options: a dedicated team, a relocated team, or some type of JV. And Tasmania has already gone one step further and said, no, it's all or nothing. So that's creating a negotiation standpoint as well. I realise it's frustrating for people that support the idea of a dedicated Tasmanian team, but they're just the facts as I've ascertained from a number of clubs as I see them at the minute. And I'll whip through some news items that have come across my desk and my phone in brief. The Bulldogs, big boost for them yesterday. Lockie Hunter was back at training. The Bulldogs posted that photo. He wasn't expected back. I'd been checking on this story until post-bye. The Bulldogs are 6-6. They're ninth on the ladder at the moment. That's got the capacity when he's fit and back and firing to absolutely boost their season. He'd been on personal leave for the best part of at least 7 weeks. North Melbourne, it's my strong view now that they're looking to boost their football department. They've got some money, not left over, but some money there from when the 3 recruiters recently left. Jaden Stevenson, a lot of discussion continuing regarding his omission. I think it still raises eyebrows in some list circles, and I think there's certainly a view that he should be in the team, for example, from his management. He's in consideration for a return this weekend, which I think is fairly significant. You know, he was absolutely flying at Collingwood at one stage. He was going well at North, and his form drop-off under David Noble and his selection status has been a big discussion point and certainly interesting. Has the market for Alastair Clarkson cooled for the moment? Well, for the moment, yes. It looks like the Giants, who I knew met this week regarding their coaching search, they're beginning to ramp that up. It looks like they're not looking particularly at Clarko for the moment. Adam Uze's name is getting mentioned. I know Ken Hinkley's name is getting mentioned in the media, but it just seems to me as if they might be looking at going for more of an Uze type. Again, though, it's very, very early in that process. The Suns, my mail is that the president has certainly been of the view recently, as has the CEO, Mark Evans, that they're very happy with Stuart Dew at the moment. The players seem supportive, and I think he's edging closer, certainly due to a contract extension. Does it mean that things couldn't change with Clarko? Absolutely not. You know, the coaching landscape could still change significantly in the second half of the year at Port, perhaps North, perhaps Essendon. Essendon again, though, clearly backing Ben Rutten. Absolutely this morning, Xavier Campbell on radio, their CEO. Just at one from the AFL, I think there's a common view from the Commission now. They're certainly supportive of the idea. The Commission is supportive, I think, of Andrew Dillon, the AFL legal counsel and footy boss, potentially taking over from Gillan McLachlan. I know some of the clubs would like the AFL to cast their net wider and look at clubland or even beyond that. One name that's come up in some discussions I've come across is a guy called Dan Rosen, who's a highly rated music executive at Warner Music, and I know a lot of the clubs, or a number of the clubs, rate him, but I think it's unlikely they'd go for someone without football experience, and I know at the moment there's some growing Commission support, if he wants to get it, for Andrew Dillon to take over from Gillan McLachlan. It's going to be a big night, as I mentioned, for Port Adelaide in particular tonight. They could be 3 games outside the 8 if they don't win tonight. That start, as I mentioned, is seriously beginning to come back to haunt them. It's been a big news day in football. I'll be back tomorrow for all the latest. We'll have Thursday night football, and we'll know if Port's one step closer to being in the finals or if the Tigers are just punching back into the 8. Triple M rocks football.